There are heroes among us. Disciplined, dependable, courageous, committed. Where others walk away, turn away, these exceptional individuals step up and stand in. You call them friend, coworker, neighbor, relative. We call them the Responsibles.
All right, well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. My name is Scott, and I have a microphone. I got it. I brought it. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't. I won't next service. But it's good to be with you as we wrap up this series that we are in called The Responsibles. And it's a series that we've said, hey, this has been a series about a real special kind of person, special kind, a group of people. It's the kind of people that we say, hey, you know what? We love knowing people like this. We love being friends with them. We love working with them, being related to them, because they're the kind of person who make just like amazing spouse or an amazing parent or neighbor or coworker or boss, because they have this unexpected, really underrated superpower. And so we see that where there are other people in our lives where they're just always leaving us hanging, they're turning away from us, and the responsibles are the people who just kind of step up and stand in. Other people drop the ball, they do it often, but these are the people who are like, I would never want to do that to somebody else. Others blame shift and make excuses for themselves, but these people are so mature, so secure in who they are, that they own whatever they need to own. And so their superpower, what is it? And you're like, you know what, if I had a superpower, maybe it would be X-ray vision, maybe it would be invisibility, maybe a great superpower to have would be the ability to have like the perfect answer every time somebody says, hey, what's for dinner tonight, right? It's like, I know what it is, I've got it. But it turns out that their superpower is actually something that they were created for. Turns out they have the ability to get this. They have the ability to choose their response to any situation. I know. You're like, wow, that's wild. I would never dream of something like that. But as we've been referring to this, we say, hey, they have response ability. And even though there are a million different inputs or things that contribute to the realities that we face in life, there are societal inputs and genetic and circumstantial and spiritual, and there are all these inputs. The responsibles, they never give those factors power or permission to control how they respond, right? And so they take ownership of their emotions and moods and actions and reactions and words and behavior. The responsibles at their core, they know that they were created for this. They were created to be responsible, and that they are at their best when they carry that responsibility well. And they understand that because one person's irresponsibility, it always becomes someone else's responsibility. They would never want to drop the things that they were intended to carry or care for. But here's the really good thing, the really encouraging thing that we recognized last week, is that these special people are by no means like perfect. It's not like they're flawless, they make mistakes, they mess up, but it is their response to the messes that they make that really sets them apart, because they know how to clean up a mess they've made, and they actually do it, right? So they do it as quickly as possible. They own their part of the mess with this stellar apology that recognizes the wrong that was done and the damage it caused, the regret that they feel, and they seek to do whatever they can to make it right. And you know why they do that, to make it right? Because they realize that you cannot talk your way out of a problem that you behaved your way into. And so as we talk about all these qualities, you're like, that's a great kind of person. Like, that's an awesome person. I would love to know a person like that. But all throughout the series, we've been asking ourselves if we are actually they. And we've asked that question with some skepticism. Like, am I a person who is taking responsibility for my life? Am I really doing that? Am I owning my actions and reactions and emotions and responses? Am I owning the messes that I've made? And get this, am I understanding that the way that I am living my life today is going to follow me and my loved ones into the future? And today, we're going to focus on that last piece right there, not where we've been, but what we're doing and what that means for where we're going. And we're going to do so by checking out a passage that is written to first century followers of Jesus by a man that we know as Paul or the Apostle Paul. And Paul was a guy who, as we often talk about, for a part of his life, he really opposed the early Jesus movement and everything that Christians stood for. But his life is radically changed, and he experiences this like redemption and grace and new life in Jesus. So much that his new mission becomes telling people however and wherever he can about Jesus, and he works to establish communities of Jesus followers, churches. And Paul does this for a very long time, but it's during what people refer to as his first missionary journey that he helps to plant or launch a church in the province of Galatia. And that meant that he invested a lot of time in these people's lives. But then it gets to the point where he recognizes, okay, I need to step away. I need to let you grow on your own. And so he does. And when he does, it is a mess. All sorts of dysfunction, breakdowns. The followers of Jesus there, they begin creating these they begin creating like hoops that people have to jump through in order to earn accept. It's like it is so opposite of the way of Jesus. And so Paul is like, I need to address this. And he writes a letter where he talks a lot about this undeserved grace of God and the importance of following Jesus by constantly staying connected to God's Spirit. And as he does that, he says a couple great things in this passage related to responsibility, both our responsibility that we take for ourselves and the responsibility we have to show up for others. And then towards the end of this passage, he's going to highlight a principle that, man, if we could not just understand it and intellectually go, oh, I get what that means, but live lives like fully aware of this, it's a principle that has the potential to drastically impact not only our future, but the future of those closest to us. And so that's where we're going to pick up Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, where Paul writes to the church and he says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, so like as you're doing life with one another and you're caring for another, you recognize that someone has literally, and he says, like, if somebody's lost their footing or stumbled or fallen down, then he says, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. And when he says that phrase, live by the Spirit, it's actually this call back to something that he's already stated with them earlier in the letter. And it's that the best way to love God and love other people is to stay connected to God's personal presence within us. It's his Holy Spirit. And so as people stumble, he says, you who truly care for them, you should restore them in this loving, humble, and gentle way. And when he says that word restore, the Greek word that is used here is this word katariso. Katariso is a medical term. It was used to refer to setting a fractured bone. You're like, I get what that is. It's one of those moments where the doctor says, hey, your arm, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is you get to keep your arm, but the bad news is it will not heal on its own. I'm going to need to set it, right? So in this area with your arm, or maybe in a different area, with this addiction, or with this dysfunction, or this destructive habit in my life, well, you know what? We need to address it. We can't neglect it. We've got to set it straight because it will not get better on its own. But Paul warns them. He says, but watch yourselves in this, or you may also be tempted. In other words, I don't want you to think for a moment that could not be you, because we are all just one stupid decision away from losing our footing as well. And so he says, don't get full of yourself, but instead carry each other's burdens. And in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. Like when you are sharing life with people, you'll see them from time to time, and they're under this like really heavy, crippling burden. And this heavy load that they were not meant to carry alone. And so you see that, and you figure out a way to get up under that burden and help take a piece of that for them. Because that is love, that is service, and that is the way or the law of Jesus. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, you will actually know you're a follower of Jesus because you will find yourself doing this type of stuff all the time. But here is the thing. He says, if anyone thinks that they are something when they're not, some of us have met people that were like, they think there's something, but I don't think that they are. He says, if anybody thinks there's something when they're not, they deceive themselves. And he's letting them know that if they think that they're above this, if they think they're above either receiving help from others or helping people who are in need, man, if you think that for one reason, then that is only not only committing self-deception, but it is breaking the law of Jesus. And from here, he introduces the concept of personal responsibility. He says, each one should test their own actions. Each one should test their own actions. Like, I don't want us to become people who put others' perceived motives under a microscope and we're judging them, but instead he says, hold up the mirror to yourself and ask, okay, what am I doing? How am I living? What can be observed from my life? Because then they can take pride in themselves alone without feeling this need to compare themselves to someone else. And as he talks about what it means to take pride in ourselves, he's not talking about this self-centeredness, this arrogance, this elevated ego where we think we're better than we are. He's talking about the feeling of self-efficacy we get when instead of looking around and getting caught in this comparison trap where we feel good about ourselves if we're doing better than others, or we feel bad about ourselves if we're worse off, right? He says, no, that's not it. Instead, we have the gift to look at our lives and how we're living and say, you know what? I am doing the absolute best I can at being responsible with my life, right? I am doing the right thing. I'm correcting my mistakes. I'm owning what I can. I'm pleased with how I'm carrying this responsibility. And we need to know that we can show up for ourselves like this because he says each of us, each one should carry their own load. And it is really hard to believe that you can actually do that unless you've had experiences where other people let you do that and you stepped up to the plate and you realize, oh, I can do this. I can carry my own load. But this might be the time where you're like, hey, I'm appreciative of what he's saying, but I just want to raise my hand because it sounds like he's contradicting himself, right? In verse 2, he says something, and doesn't he say, like, we're supposed to carry each other's burdens? But then in verse 5, apparently, we are all responsible for carrying our own burdens. So which one is it? Do we carry each other's loads, or are we responsible for our own? And that's a really important question, and the answer to that question is yes. The answer is it's actually both. And I get that that might sound a little bit contradictory, but what he's saying is actually really complementary. And we'll dive into that in just a minute. But first, as we're reading through this, there are like these two observations that just jump off the page in what Paul is saying. He is saying first that we need one another. We need one another. We just do if we're going to follow Jesus. And the second part is that we are responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for ourselves. And so as followers of Jesus, it's this relationship we have where we are interdependent. We love others, and we allow others to actually love us. We serve others, and we allow others to serve us. We care for one another, and we allow ourselves to be cared for. And yet, we never fail to be responsible for the things, the decisions, the emotions, the thoughts, the burdens that belong to us. See, we take responsibility for our own lives even as we help carry one another's burdens. And you're like, okay, I get that. I could buy into that. But if that's what Paul meant, why didn't Paul say that? And he actually kind of does. He just says it more effectively than I can. So in verse 2, Paul instructs us to carry each other's burdens. And he uses the Greek word here, baros. Baros referred to this heavy load. It was literally meant like a heavy burden. It was referred to as what cargo ships would transport. It was this load or this weight that no single person could ever be expected to carry. Many of you in this room, you've moved before. You know the experience of going, you know what, I have got this thing that I need help moving. I've got an armoire, I've got a dresser, I've got a dining table, I've got a couch, something that I wanted, so I bought it and I want to keep it, but now I need help moving it. You've got one of those things, right? I think we got a picture of our couch. So we've got a couch, it's a good couch. good couch to take a nap on. And for me, as you see that couch, you're like, that's a large couch. And I'm not the largest guy. And so for me to try to carry that couch on my own, you wouldn't be like, you know what? He ought to, right? You wouldn't be like, yeah, he needs to, that's his couch. He needs to get under that. You wouldn't even be like, that's impressive if you do it. If I attempted to carry that couch on my own, you're like, that is so stupid, buddy. Why are you doing this? You're not meant to carry that on your own. And so if I'm moving, I might go, you know what? I need some help to carry this couch. I might ask a few of you, can you show up? I'll give you pizza. I'll give you whatever you need. But I need you to take a corner of this couch because I need help carrying this load, this burden, this weight. And so you might do it, and you might help me to carry that load. But at the same time, whose load is that? Who does that belong to? It's still mine. Like, just because you came doesn't mean it's your couch, right? Like, no, that is my burden. That's my load. And so that's the thing that I am still responsible for. And sometimes we encounter these things in life that are absolutely these heavy burdens. We encounter things in life that are the tragedies, the losses, the pain, the illnesses, the diagnoses, the abandonment, the deep depression that, man, they are the loads that we were never meant to bear on our own. To carry someone else's burden is a way where we sacrificially do for them what they simply cannot do for themselves. And why would we do that? Because that is what God through Christ has done for us. And so that is the logical way that we live in response to that type of grace. And so if we would say that we are followers of Jesus, we are ready to follow that example. We do not become a burden to others. We lift burdens off of others. But then Paul talks about the loads that we actually can carry. And the loads he refers to in verse 5, he uses the Greek word phortion. This was used to refer to like a soldier's pack. It was a military term. It's referring to something that is completely reasonable for you to expect me to be able to carry. And you look at that word phortion and you go, it's kind of like portion, right? It's my portion. It's the thing that I can handle, that I can be expected to carry. And we all have these loads as well. These are our like manageable responsibilities. And so when it comes to my phortion, to my pack, like these are my emotions and my decisions and my ability to take care of myself and follow through on my commitments and clean up the messes that I've made along the way. And maybe these things are not always fun to carry, but it's not unreasonable to expect a person to carry a backpack, right? And while you might see me and go, you know what, he's moving and he needs help with his couch, I'm willing to help him with that burden. If I go, yeah, and also I've got this backpack and it's just kind of too much for me, you're rolling your eyes and you're like, there's no way that you expect me to carry that thing for you as well. And Paul wants us to understand that as followers of Jesus, seeking to live out the way of Jesus together, that part of that means we are expected to show up and to serve one another. That's his law, that's his rule, that's his way. But we've got to understand that another Christian or another person's love and service towards me is never an excuse for me to act irresponsibly. It's never an excuse for me to not show up for my own life. Well, then next, Paul says something, we'll see in verse 7, that is so important. We can't miss it. It's a principle that explains why irresponsibility always catches up with us. And it's a principle that is not good and it is not bad, it just is. And so we can either decide that we are going to leverage that for our good or ignore it and experience the consequences. He says in verse 7, do not be deceived. See, God cannot be mocked, and a man reaps what he sows. He's saying God can't be outwitted or outsmarted or fooled. God's not your parent that you used to trick as a teenager and say like, oh, I just don't know why that happened. Please let me off the hook. God is not that other person that you made up this sad story as an excuse to get out of responsibility and they bought it, right? There may be other arenas in life where we're able to duck responsibility sometimes and seemingly escape the consequences. But he says, you know what? That doesn't work with God because that doesn't work with life. A person always reaps what they sow. They always harvest what they plant. And a person's decisions and choices and thoughts and habits always show up in their future because life is connected. See, there's always a correlation between the way we lived in the past and what we're experiencing right now, and also what's coming in the future, whether that be good or bad. And this principle is what we would call the law of the harvest. The law of the harvest says that we reap what we sow. But here's the thing. When it comes to the law of the harvest, we will reap later and we will reap greater. Later, meaning that there's often this delay between what was sown and what comes back to us. And if you've ever planted something, you're like, yeah, I understand that. It's obvious. You don't plant something and it's just like instantaneous or immediate and all of a sudden you harvest it. No, when you sow seeds, you realize it's going to take some time to see what that seed will grow into. And we also reap greater. That seed that is scattered is often like so teeny. You throw that out there and it's barely anything, and yet later on with the harvest, when it is fully mature, that seed is so much greater than it originally started, right? That harvest is so much greater. And this principle extends to our lives further than we would ever imagine. It's more than seeds in plants. It's our habits and it's our decisions, right? It's our emotions and it's our thought life. It's our discipline and it's our lack thereof. It's how we show up in our relationships. It's how we show up in our work life. And there's always a price to be paid when we live irresponsibly, right? Because we will reap that later and greater. And sometimes it shows up in ways that we go, this isn't fair. But that principle is still true. And yet, conversely, there is always, always, always a reward to be gained when we take responsibility and we see the connection between how we live today and the harvest we get to enjoy in the future. But honestly, what I would like this because it seems really gracious, is if the principle said, you know what, people reap what they sow unless they really regret what they've sown, right? People reap what they sow unless they feel really bad about what they sowed, right? People reap what they sow, unless they promise to change in the future. But it doesn't go like that because life is connected and it always catches up to us, which is why sometimes, even though we make these necessary adjustments, man, we still reap in the present what we sowed long ago in the past. There are still these consequences, even though we've changed things along the way, consequences in our present because we sowed this years ago or even decades ago. Last week we said that when responsible people recognize that they have made a mess, they do whatever they can to clean it up, including asking for forgiveness from those who were involved. However, we noted this, that forgiveness does not release us from our responsibility for our past. And in the same way, because of the law of the harvest, forgiveness does not release us from the consequences in our future. And it's actually even bigger than that. See, here's something that might make us a little bit nervous, or it might make us excited and actually even bring us hope. That we are not the only ones who will reap what we've sown. See, the results of how you and I are living, whether we'd say it's good or bad right now, the results will spill over into the lives of those around us, those who are closest to us, those who we love so much, whether that was intended or not. And some of us, we've been on the receiving end of that before. We've reaped certain things in our lives that we go, you know what? This was the direct result of the choices or decisions or the habits or addictions of people in my life. It wasn't even me. It was a parent. It was a spouse. It was a child. You see, our choices from yesterday and today, they impact our future tomorrow, and they will leave our loved ones with one of two things, either a burden or a blessing. And guess what? The responsibles are the type of people who don't ignore that. They let it actually inform the way they live. And so I want to toss out this question. It's a challenging question, and I would challenge you to be honest with yourself as you answer it. As you think about any potential irresponsibility in your life right now, whose future does your current irresponsible behavior potentially jeopardize? Like, whose future might be impacted by certain habits or decisions or choices or practices or addictions that you have right now? Or maybe it's related to financial irresponsibility. How will that land on others around you in the future? Or maybe it's the way that, honestly, you haven't been taking care of your physical health the way that you feel like you ought to, and maybe it's the impact that that will have on others who will need to care for you further down the road longer than they probably should have needed to care for you. Or maybe you're a parent, and if so, the potential impact of the ripple effect of what we're talking about, of our lives into the lives of our kids, is even greater. And so you ask yourself, okay, is there any irresponsibly unhealthy behavior that I am modeling to my kids? How will that impact their lives? Or maybe you think about relationships with those closest to you, and you ask, is there any way I've been showing up in this relationship that's causing harm? It's causing restriction for them. It's causing me to be a part of their future pain. And just ask that question. There's a great line in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 12, where it says, the prudent see danger and they actually take refuge, but the simple keep going and they pay the penalty. And I think this is just like a great image that it paints for us, that the prudent or the truly wise person, they see the road they're going down, and when they go, you know what, I don't like where this road goes, they in turn correct course and they make the necessary adjustments because they don't want to wind up there. But then there's another person. There's the simple person. This person is like the fool. And the fool closes his eyes, refuses to acknowledge where those signs are pointing, and winds up right where the path was going all along. And then he's got to deal with the consequences of his irresponsibility. And as I think about that, the realization for me is that my future and your future is coming for you. And we're on a path right now, and we're headed towards that future. And our decisions and our habits and our choices and our thought life, these are the steering wheels of our lives, and they're steering us in a specific direction. And here's the thing, when it comes to this other principle that we call the principle of the path, it is our direction and is not our intention that determines our destination. And you know this to be true already, right? If you get in a car, you hop on the freeway, you go on the 5 North, and you drive for a couple hours, no matter how much you wanted or intended or hoped to wind up in San Diego, if you go on the 5 North for a couple hours, it's not going to lead there, right? It doesn't matter if you want, you know what, I really, really want to get to San Diego. It's just going to happen because you're going to go on a path that goes a different direction. And so as we think about this, we've got to ask ourselves, okay, if I keep steering myself towards this destination, where does that actually lead? Where does it lead if financially I continue to spend like I've been spending and failing to save? Where does it lead if physically I continue to ignore what I'm eating and avoid any kind of exercise? Where does it lead if I continue this habit of dishonesty or gossiping? Where does it lead relationally if I don't get a handle on my anger and managing my emotions? Where does this lead in my marriage if I just go, you know what, this is just innocent flirting with another person? Where does that actually lead? Where does it lead if I continue to have this avoidance in communicating when there's conflict? Right? Where does this lead? And the simple person, the fool, he sticks his fingers in his ears, right? He closes his eyes and he says, I'm not listening. I don't want to know where it winds up. Quit telling me where that winds up. But the prudent or the wise person asks these questions, asks really, answers truthfully, and makes the necessary adjustments to wind up at that desired destination. Because they understand there's just no fooling or mocking God. There is the law of the harvest. We reap what we sow, and so we can either leverage this principle for our good or we can ignore it for our detriment. And so let's decide that we will sow decisions and habits and choices and thoughts that bring about life and produce blessing, not just for us, but for those around us. And here's the thing, as we talk about this topic, it's really good information, but unless we decide that we're going to put it into practice, it kind of ends up being a bit useless. And so what you'll find is if you're using the message notes, on the back side towards the bottom, I've left a little space for us to be able to reflect and consider, okay, what do I want to do with this today? And so there's a question on there. And the question says, hey, is there a path I'm on that I don't like where it leads? And if so, okay, will I keep going and pay the penalty, or will I take responsibility and make adjustments? And so right now, I just want to encourage you, even as I'm talking, just reflect. Since I know that I will reap later and greater, is there something I'm sowing right now that needs to change? And if there are some changes that you're like, you know what, I want to make these, just kind of identify them, jot them down there in that space. And maybe as you're thinking through that, you might just go, okay, I'm going to consider this. Over the last number of weeks, months, and years, has there been anything that somebody has brought up to you about your behavior or your habits or your choices that concerned them? Right? They wanted to bring it up to your attention, and it was someone who knows you, wants the best for you, and had the courage to actually bring it up to you. And maybe it was about something that you're like, you know what, this is something I see that you're into, and it concerns me, or someone who's around you, and I'm worried about it, or a recent change in you, or something that you've been letting control you. And maybe there is. Or maybe you forget about other people and what they brought up to you, whether you would say it's like my conscience or even God's Spirit bringing it to your attention. Maybe you recognize that there have been some things that have come to the surface and you go, you know what? I understand. It is time for me to actually address this because I don't like where it leads and I don't want it to be a burden for me or for other people. And maybe there is. Maybe you think of something. Maybe there's not something that comes to mind. But let us not lie to ourselves, right? Let's not be the type of people who say, you know what? I think I got this, right? There's this thing that people see in me, but I got this. I can handle this. It's been a problem for other people, but it won't be a problem for me. It might catch up to others, but it's not going to catch up to me because for whatever reason, I just understand that I am the exception to the rule, right? And as we think about that, we go, oh, I don't want to do that because that is not a responsible way to live. But we're different, right? We are going to be the responsibles. And we are going to live differently, right? We're going to be the people who stand out for the right reasons because we actually decide that we will and we can take responsibility for our lives. And so we will refuse to blame others for what we have done. And we will clean up our messes when we realize we've made them. And we will understand that life is absolutely connected, that how we live today will play out in our future and the future of those around us. And as we do this, we recognize this is the life that Jesus invites us to. This is what it means to follow him. This is the life that he has modeled for us. And these are lives where we are at our best when we carry the responsibility we've been given and we carry it well. And so as we end and wrap up, let's pray and ask our Heavenly Father to help us to walk out this life that he's called us to. So Lord, as we just reflect, we just want to say that we want to live the type of lives that you created us for, where we receive the tasks and the responsibilities and really the adventures you call us to walk in, and we carry it well. And so help us to show up for our lives and really take ownership of what you've placed in our hands. And God, when we realize that we've dropped the ball or we've messed up, help us to see that you are this God whose grace and forgiveness never run out. And because those things are so transformative for us, may they lead us to be the type of people who clean up messes we make and do whatever we can to make things right. And we want to understand that how we live today, it will dictate the future that we wind up with tomorrow. And so would you give us a sensitivity to see if there are any adjustments that we need to make to ensure that we will like where that future leads and that we will leave our loved ones with a blessing and not a burden. And we want to follow you, Jesus, and we need your help. And so we ask you for that. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.